All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is Philippe Yobel. I'm the head of the Aerospace Engineering Department here at Illinois. And it's a true pleasure and honor for me to introduce the speaker today, Mike Hopkins. A few words about him. He grew up on a farm in Missouri, then crossed the border and joined our department. He graduated from our department, which at that time was called Aeronautical and Astronautical Engineering, in 1991. In addition to graduating for what is undoubtedly the most challenging engineering program at Illinois, Mike showed a remarkable ability to manage his time during his years on campus, since he was also part of the football team. He even ended up captain of the team in his last year on campus. We will not go into too many details about the record of the team at that time. Let's just say that these were challenging years. After a master's in aerospace engineering at Stanford, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force in 1992. He had a very successful career at the Air Force, first as a flight test pilot on C-17 and C-130, then in a variety of international assignments that brought him to Canada and Italy, and ultimately as a special assistant to the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, D.C. His current rank in the Air Force is colonel. In July 2009, he was selected among hundreds of applicants as one of the 14 members of the 20th NASA astronaut class. He went through intensive training over the next 2 years, and as you know, he just spent 6 months on the International Space Station. He launched on board of a Soyuz spacecraft on September 25th, 2013, and came back to Earth on March 10, 2014. We're going to hear a lot about his experience there. This past October, in this very room, we had the chance to talk to him for a short time directly from the space station, thanks to a link that was established by NASA. We are delighted to have him back on campus for a longer talk about his recent mission. During the talk last October, he impressed us all by performing a flip in front of the camera. We do not expect him to do the same today, although it would be a great way to illustrate the difference between gravity and weightlessness. I'll leave it up to you. Okay. So, Mike, we're really looking forward to your talk, and all of you, please join me in welcoming Mike Hopkins.
Thank you so much. Wow, so it's great to be here on Earth. It's great to be here at Illinois. It's been a while since I've actually been over on the engineering campus, and so it's changed a lot since I was here back in 1991. So you guys, you have a beautiful campus here, and I'm anxious to see a little bit more over the weekend. Thank you for the kind introduction, and certainly I'm looking forward to sharing the experience that I had going into space. Truly incredible experience, and I'm excited to get to share it. I'm also excited to be here today because I think it'll be a nice warm-up for tomorrow. So, I'll go back. I'll give a few more details before I get started. I do have a video that'll kind of summarize the mission. But again, I went into the Air Force. Becoming an astronaut was always a dream. It was a dream that started back in high school. But at the same time, I pursued my career in the Air Force, and it was and has been, and I'm still active duty. So it's been an incredible career. It's something that I absolutely loved doing, testing airplanes and living overseas, working for the vice chairman, working on a lot of special projects. And so, I think that's one of the messages that is important as we talk about being astronauts and getting to fly into space and how incredible that is. At the same time, if that had never worked out, I was extremely happy. I was extremely happy with what I was getting to do in the Air Force, and I was extremely happy with my family and my kids. And so I think in the end, as incredible as this was, that certainly is a message I don't want any of us to forget. And as all of you are, the younger group, kids in the crowd, kids, adults, as you're looking at your careers, that's certainly one of the most important parts is to find something that you love to do, that you're passionate about, and pursue that. And you never know where that's going to take you. And I think if any of you are tomorrow, you'll hear a little bit of that message as well. 2009, though, that was a great year. That's when I got the call. Now, it was my fourth try getting selected by NASA. And let me tell you, that was an amazing call to get. That's that call you've been waiting for your entire life. And it was funny, I was talking to Chris as we were walking over here. I thought that was the call, right? That was the most important call that I would ever receive. And I was wrong, believe it or not. I should probably say it was when my wife told me my kids were pregnant, but or that she was pregnant, not my kids were pregnant, excuse me. I hope my kids aren't pregnant, they're boys. But anyway, the more surprising was when I got the call to go into the chief of the astronauts office, and they offered me an assignment. And I realized, holy smokes, that call to come to NASA was incredible, but this call to actually, we really do want to send you into space, that was a pretty special moment. So I'm very excited to get to share that experience with you. And so without any further ado, what I'll do is I'll show you the video. I'm going to kind of narrate as we go through the video. And then afterwards, really, I'd like to just open it up to any kind of questions you might have. So if we could start the video here. And it's going to start out, really what it's going to show you. So we were Expedition 37 and 38. In the International Space Station, there are always 6 people on board. What you're seeing here is the end of 2.5 years of training. We do launch on the Russian Soyuz rocket. And so this is the final exams. I actually launched with 2 Russian cosmonauts, Oleg Kotov and Sergei Ryazansky. Incredible people, and it was an honor and a privilege to do that. So we're sitting actually right before our final exam. That's the simulator, and the interesting part about the simulator that I found when we actually went down to Kazakhstan, that's where we launch out of. This is the Soyuz rocket, and when I crawled into that rocket, it looked like the simulator. You know, other than the fact that there was a little bit more vibration at the end when it lit off. Everything looked the same, and so that was very comforting, because sitting on top of a rocket like that could probably make you a little bit nervous. But when you see everything, when you just start stepping your way through the procedures and all of that, really it's not as, I'll say sometimes it's not as a dramatic event as you would think, because you're very focused on what you're doing. The training kicks in, and so this is right before we ride the elevator up onto the rocket. It takes about almost 9 minutes to get into orbit. The Soyuz itself is it's been around a while. It's the rocket they were using back in the 60s when we were with the Apollo.
9, 8,
so
7,
it's a very
6,
reliable ride.
5,
and
4,
here you can
3,
see
2,
the launch.
1,
We actually launched
ignition.
at 3 in the morning in Kazakhstan. And
Fly now.
interesting, before they used to do 2
And the
days.
Soyuz is now on its way with Mike Hopkins, Oleg Kotov, and Sergei Ryazansky on a 6-hour ride to the International Space Station.
They actually changed, and we do it in full orbit, so we get to the station in just 6 hours. And so the most exciting part about the ride here was the different stages. So as the staging would happen, one stage kicks off, you kind of get thrown forward in your straps, and then the next stage kicks in, and you get thrown back a little bit. But then that third stage, when you get thrown, that last stage, and you're actually in orbit now. And here you can see inside the Soyuz itself, it is pretty crowded. But when you get thrown into orbit, what a feeling. It's different for everybody. For me, I felt like I was falling. If you guys were all to flip your seats upside down, put them on the ceiling, and then let go, that was how it felt for me. And it felt that way for probably the first 24 hours or so that I was in space. So this is actually Moscow, mission control there. And the docking on the Soyuz is actually all automatic. Unless, of course, something isn't in parameters or whatever, the commander that's in the center seat, he can take over and he can dock it manually. So here you can see, again, this is automatic docking, and it actually is pretty smooth. You don't really feel there's not you're there, but it's not that dynamic, I'll say. But yeah, this was 6 hours afterwards. So pretty amazing how quickly you go from being on Earth to being at the International Space Station itself.
9:45 p.m. Central Time with the space station.
Yeah. So what you're seeing right there, that's called the Bay O. That's kind of the living compartment on the Soyuz, and then the middle section is is the descent module, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we start talking about landing.
Official time, 11:34 p.m.
So
Central Time.
yeah, there's the hatch. So
12:34 a.m.
I get asked a lot of questions about the medical masks in the hatch. So Oleg Kotov is actually a flight doc, and my other crewmate Sergei Ryazansky, they're both doctors, medical doctors. So you know, as the lone engineer, I guess I lost out, and we were going to show up as doctors, though you certainly wouldn't want me performing any real medical work on you. Though interesting enough, we all do get trained to be medical officers while we're up there, because you never know. You may not have the opportunity to be flying with actual doctors that if anything were to go wrong, that they can take care of you. So I have been trained in you know, the crude medical procedures. I can start some IVs, I can draw my own blood, that kind of thing. But so again, right now, you know, it may look normal to me, but I felt the other interesting thing when I got on the station, of course, there's no up and down in space, right? But at this point, I actually felt like the space station was flying left wing low. No idea why. There certainly wasn't, you know, certainly it didn't matter. You know, this is the other part I want to show that you'll see in this video, and that's the family part of it. It's an amazing experience for us as the astronauts to go into space, but it's a very stressful time for the family members to sit there and watch your loved ones launch on a rocket. Can be pretty stressful, and so I wanted to share that. You know, we get to talk to them right afterwards. In fact, this day is a long day for us, but it's probably just as long or longer for the family members. And so there we are. This is Expedition 37. Yeah, and so we joined. It's amazing what you can do when you're floating and in microgravity. And that's looking out the cupola itself. Again, the views of the Earth are stunning from 260 miles up. And so there she is. There's the International Space Station. That was home for 166 days or so.
I've been on station now for what, an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So I'm going to open up the windows to cupola and see what the view's like here.
Yeah, so this was my first view, and it truly does take your breath away when you see the Earth from that vantage point. In fact, I often get asked about it, and what's amazing about the view is I found there's not a part of the Earth that isn't stunning from that vantage point. Even things that I never would have thought would have looked interesting were, like deserts, for example, the sand dunes, and the way the wind forms the sand dunes and the geometric patterns that you see were truly incredible. Now, I often get asked about what a normal day is like on station, and there's really four different types of things that we tended to do in a daily routine. Maintenance. You know, the space station is like your home. It's like your lab. You know, you got to take care of it. And so we spend a lot of time just doing the daily maintenance. And this is one of those fun days where we actually have to rotate. Everything we talk about on space station is in racks. And of course, we have racks on the walls, on the ceiling, and on the deck. And so in this case, we're changing out, we'd had some issues with our audio system, and so I just had to change out this box. And so in order to do that, though, I had to rotate the rack to get back to it. And so that's kind of fun, because now you're starting to get down into the guts of the space station itself. And you don't get to do that every day, but it's certainly enjoyable when you do get to do it. Obviously, we've sped up a little bit here to get through it. But you know, the other part of this is we're in direct communication with the ground the whole time. And so there's systems experts on the ground as we're walking through this, so that if we have any issues whatsoever. I didn't know I could move that fast. Now, that's the other thing that happens in microgravity. No. So the other interesting part here, as you can see, I mean, this is a rack that's taken up a whole lot of space, and yet people are able to move around in microgravity. A lot of times people think, oh, you're going to block everything off. There's not going to be room for things. And you can really, it's amazing how little space you need when you're able to float around just to maneuver around. This is actually the WHC. That's the waste and hygiene compartment, so the toilet. Man, that thing breaks a lot up there. And so you're kind of seeing into the guts of the toilet here, but that's the one thing too, that whenever it breaks, you fix it. Everything else kind of stops, because you got to get this thing fixed. So maintenance. Here's exercise as well. But that doesn't work quite as well, just trying to run in microgravity. So we have three main pieces of hardware that we use to stay in shape, and we actually exercise a couple hours a day. And that's hard scheduled. You have to do it because of the atrophy of your muscles, of your bones. And so we have a weightlifting device you can see on the left, the treadmill over here. It's kind of interesting too as you're watching that. That's if you were to think in up and down, that's the orientation we're at. The Earth is below us and the cupola is right below you. So as you're lifting weights, you have the opportunity to look down at the Earth going by. That's our exercise bike. Of course, there's no seat, there's no handles, not required. You notice with the treadmill, we have to use bungees to hold us down on that, and so you can adjust the load by how many clips you put on the bungees with that harness. Yeah, and I don't run that fast. Even when I was playing. But this is another thing that you do a lot is you get to look out the window, and it truly is incredible. That is what it looks like. And you notice how thin the Earth's atmosphere is. The night sky is amazing. The auroras, and then finally, really our primary objective while we're up there is the science. This is believe it or not, we had ants up there for a little bit, and really looking at how the social behavior, how they went out and looked for food and things of that, and how that was impacted by the microgravity. Another issue here, you'll see we're the guinea pigs for a lot of experiments. And we've had issues in the past with the eyes, and so we do a lot of experiments associated with that. The experiments really cover a wide range of things. You've got things that are being done up there that we are not involved in, like the alpha magnetic spectrometer, right? It's out there looking for the origins of the universe, dark matter, and that's really, we're just providing the power and the data handling capabilities for that. Then you've got experiments like that, spheres, where we're working right with the PI, you'll hear me say that PI, the principal investigator. So that could be people like you here on the ground at the universities that we're working with directly. And then you've got ones like this. This is a combustion chamber, and we'll do experiments on things like suppressants, fire suppressants, and how they work in microgravity. And so what we have to do is change out the fuel reservoirs, change out the igniters, things like that. And then once we're done with that, we'll close that rack back up, and then people on the ground out of Huntsville and Marshall Space Flight Center, they'll actually control those experiments on the ground. And so those are things that will be happening while we're asleep. And so that's kind of gives you a feel for the variety of types of experiments that are ongoing, and they really do cover a wide gamut of fields. So that's kind of the typical days, if you will, is doing one of those kind of 4 activities. Then there's those special days. It's a special day when you have new crew members arrive. We actually, most of the time, we do always go up and down in 3s. And so typically 3 come down before 3 go up. So there's, we usually have 6 people on station, but this was a special time because, of course, the Russians hosted the Winter Olympics this year. And so they brought up the Olympic torch. And so we did have the Olympic torch, and I'll get that question out of the way. No, it wasn't lit. Fire is a very big deal for us on the space station. So they did not light it, but we had actually 9 crew on board at this point. It was only for 5 days. So that was a little bit unique, a little bit crowded. We do only have 6 crew quarters on board, so 3 of them were just sleeping in their sleeping bags, strapped to a wall in one of the modules. But one of the unique things that happened while we were up there is the Russians took the Olympic torch out on a spacewalk. And so you're going to see some of that video, and I want to kind of highlight the quality of it. And I'm not sure if we'll really be able to tell on this big screen, but it was with a GoPro camera, believe it or not. They literally just took a GoPro camera. If any of you have one, and you know the little case that comes with it that you can take it underwater with, well, they took it out in space with it, and it worked just. And it worked just fine. And so when you see that, so the 9 crew on board at one time, again, that's pretty unique for us on the International Space Station. Again, normally it's only 6 of us, 3 Russian cosmonauts and 2 U.S. and then either a Japanese astronaut, a European astronaut, or a Canadian astronaut. So you can get a feel here. They're floating through the FGB. That's one of the Russian modules. So you can there's Karen floating by and Rick Mastracchio, and here's those views of the spacewalk. and yeah, that's pretty amazing. The spacewalks are incredible, but the camera views that you have here as well, with just off-the-shelf technologies is amazing. So that's Oleg Kotov and Sergei Ryazanskiy. Those are my two crewmates, and so it's pretty special when you get to go out the door, and yeah, that's pretty amazing. So this was obviously a special time for us on the station. 5 days later, Karen, Luca, and Fyodor went home. So actually,
okay, guys,
we had our own problems, and so we had a pump module on the outside. So we have an external cooling loop on the space station that as we collect all of the heat and everything from internal, we have heat exchangers that take it from a water cooling loop to ammonia cooling loop outside. And so we had to go out and fix it because the pump module, a valve in there broke. And again, I also want to, you're going to see some clips from our wives that they were in the mission control down in Houston as we were going out on these spacewalks, because as excited as we are, you oftentimes forget again that there's people on the ground that are pretty worried about what's going on up there. So you're going to see, and you can see it on their faces, it's a stressful time for them, not just the launch, but then also, so actually, if we could pause it right here, if we have an opportunity
this is the most scary thing I've ever done.
Do that.
Because when you're outside, you feel vulnerable.
Is there a possibility of pausing it? If we can't, maybe we could go back to that a little bit.
That's just churning in your gut.
I don't know if, can I do it here?
It's the nervousness.
No. Okay, so I was out on that robotic arm, and that was a pretty amazing time. So you're carrying this 800-pound pump module, and when you're in your spacesuit, you can actually still kind of float in that spacesuit. So it's not a perfect fit. And so when that 800-pound, of course, it doesn't weigh anything up there, but it's got mass. And so when that arm comes to a stop, there's a tendency for you to feel like you're kind of floating in your spacesuit. And that was a little disturbing, because your initial reaction is, oh my gosh, I just came off of the arm and I'm floating away with this 800-pound pump module. So that was probably one of the interesting few seconds of the spacewalk for me. The other incredible thing about this spacewalk is when you come out the hatch, it just takes your breath away, because for the first time now you're seeing the Earth without any obstructions. You're not looking out a window, and you're truly getting to see it in all its glory. You almost feel like you could just reach out and touch it. So how do we get our food and take out the trash and things of that nature? Well, we have we call them visiting vehicles, so spaceships that bring up the supplies for us. This is the orbital vehicle, so there you can see it as it's approaching the space station. And so we're actually in the cupola monitoring the approach. And what we end up having to do is reach out with the robotic arm. There's a grapple fixture on orbital that's actually at the back end there. And we reach out with the robotic arm, we'll grapple onto it, and then we'll berth it to the station, and that's where you'll see our supplies. And it's quite interesting because the shuttle's been retired now for several years, and so our capability to bring stuff down from on orbit is limited now. We have one vehicle that can do that, and that's SpaceX and their Dragon vehicle. But this vehicle, orbital, it actually doesn't re-enter the atmosphere and land. It actually burns up in the atmosphere. And I used to always think that the SpaceX and its ability to bring things down was very, very important. But it turns out, in reality, this one is just as important. It takes out the trash, and you generate a lot of trash up there, and you need to be able to get rid of it. And that's Rick Mastracchio there, and this is one of the ways we get rid of it.
So there you have it. This is much of our food, clothes, spare parts.
So there you can see it berthed to the space station, and this is kind of funny here.
Once Cygnus is docked, it usually takes 2
hours. I don't know if you can hear that, if we could turn it up at all, but
But today, it's taking even longer because we're having problems getting the hatch open.
Hello, everybody.
Of course, it's unmanned, so there's nobody in there, fortunately. But yeah, sometimes things don't go quite as planned. But this is a good day. This is a big day for us when the supplies come. It's kind of an exciting day. Usually there's some goodies on board for you. And so there you can see what it looks like inside. It's very neat when it arrives. And usually there's some fresh fruit, maybe a little bit, maybe a couple apples or something like that. So that's always nice to get. And but just as important, again, it brings up a lot of new science experiments. It brings up new clothes, new foods, things like that we're going to need. And so yeah, that's our bonus bag, if you will, or our gift bag that we get. So our wives, friends, family, they can put some special things in there. And yeah, so.
Look at that tortilla. Look at that.
Tortillas are very exciting on station. Those are like currency up there. So it's very exciting to get that. Actually, Rick's from Connecticut. And
oh my goodness gracious, the greatest hot dog relish in the history of man.
So that's Blackie's hot dog relish, and it truly is incredible. And so yeah, these are neat moments on station as well. Those special moments.
It's not on a hot dog, but it's still darn good.
Yeah.
Very good. Wow. Life is good. Good space. Pretty darn good food.
We are eating some good food. So actually, that gives you a picture. That's in Node 1. That's where we did eat. That was kind of our table you saw. You don't, of course, we're not sitting around or sitting at the table, but it is nice to have something to to set things down on or really Velcro them down on. So at the end of the day, Orbital took away just about all the trash we had built up at that point. And so that's a big day for us, is we need to see that. So basically right now I'm pulling the arm back away. That's the grapple fixture you can see that I'm backing off of.
Cygnus is now a free flyer.
And now it's a free floater. And then it'll actually just burn up in the atmosphere. And so that's a big day for us.
Now that's taking out the trash.
It sure is. Rick's really good with the one-liners, so you'll notice I'll pause when he's talking because he has a way with words that I probably don't have. But eventually it becomes time. You're getting close to coming time home. One of the other questions though that I often get asked about is keeping in touch with your family members. And I'm 6 weeks away from coming home. That's actually my house. I didn't take that picture though. That's a little closer. But again, there's my wife, the two sons, and she's basically, she's carried the load for 6 months. And both my sons are very active, sports, school, church, and so they allow us to have a video conference with them once a week.
Before launch, I coached them in lacrosse and hockey.
And so believe it or not, those conferences worked out a couple times where I was able to watch their hockey games live. So at this point I'm 260 miles over the air floating, and through today's technology, I got to see my son score goals. I got to see him lose a few games, win a few games, but and so this was typically on the weekends, and these are pretty special moments for us when you get to see that, and so very exciting. Yeah.
He feels a little bit more connected to the kids because I know it's hard. I know he misses that stuff a lot.
I do miss it, but it's been nice since I've been back on the ground now, getting involved again with their athletics. So again, we have what we call IP phones that also of course you guys are all probably familiar with that. In fact, they're probably invented here. I don't know, but but eventually it is time to come home. And so that's kind of looking into Node 2, which is where our crew quarters are.
Place real soon. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I cleaned it, so she's ready to go with that.
It's kind of a surreal day, right? I've been up there 166 days at this point, and but it eventually does come time to come home. It's kind of one of those bittersweet moments, right? You're very excited. You're very excited to come home, but you're very sad to be leaving space because you don't get very many opportunities to go up there. And so a truly incredible experience. We're crawling back into our Soyuz vehicle that you saw us arrive in. And actually, that's the docking mechanism. When you saw those pictures of it coming in, That's actually on the front of the Soyuz there, and that's what we use to dock. So we back away. You're going to see us here. We basically kind of fly pretty close to the station for about an orbit after we've undocked, and then we do a deorbit burn. And then about 30 minutes after that deorbit burn, you enter the atmosphere, and things get pretty exciting at that point. I remember sunrises on station are pretty sudden, right? So you kind of see this glow, and there you can actually see as we're entering the atmosphere, some of this is the plasma, some of it is things burning off the station. But I saw that orange glow. I wasn't looking out the window, and you're kind of like, oh, the sun just rose, and then you realize, no, we're burning up in the atmosphere. but that's a good thing. So there's Oleg Kotov, the commander.
Thanks for getting me home.
That guy's great. So yeah, it's a pretty incredible experience when you get back on Earth. It's amazing how heavy things are. We have our flight procedures that we carry. It's a book that weighs, I don't know, half a pound maybe. And you have to lift that up and out of the capsule, hand it to the search and rescue guys, and I would have swore it was probably 30 or 50 pounds, something like that. It was amazing. Your head feels heavy. I had, I'll say, vestibular issues in terms of pitching moments, so if I was just to lean over like this, right when I got back, I felt like I was just going to face plant right into the computer up here. So it's a pretty weird feeling to be back in gravity. And so that's the mission, but the mission doesn't end once you land. In fact, once we get back down on the ground, those initial days right after landing are pretty critical for the science piece of it. And so we do a lot of rehabilitation initially, but then we also are doing what we call baseline data collection. So all of these experiments where we're the guinea pigs, they want to collect data before we launch, they want to collect data while we're in space, and then as soon as you land, they want to collect as much as they can as well, because they want to get you before you readapt to life in 1G. And so really you spend probably the first 45 days after landing doing a lot of those kind of activities, debriefs, things of that nature. And then once that's done, you get to start going on the road and sharing the experience. And so that's where I am today in terms of my post-flight experience. I'll do this for probably another 3 or 4 months where I'll spend a lot of time traveling around, sharing the experience. So that's the mission. That's what typically happens for every crew that goes up into space now. That kind of gives you a feel for what the 6 months is like when you're up there. But again, there's 2.5 years prior to that of training, and then there's another 6 months here afterwards before we really kind of are back in the line again for flying into space. So at this point, I would love to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Ladies and
Thanks. Sure.
just take that for a moment, and then I'll pass them around. Oh, okay. All right, so.
All right.
Is it hot in the spacesuit?
Is it hot in the spacesuit? Yes, it's very hot. So, I had 2 different types of spacesuits that I was wearing. So the white suit that you saw for launch and landing, that's the Sokol suit that we wear. And that suit is really just designed to get you home in an emergency. So if there was a depressed situation or something like that, it's going to pressurize and it's going to get you home safe. But it's not really meant to be worn long term. But it's very hot. You don't really have any active cooling other than just ventilation that's going through it. So anytime, by the time you get out of that suit, you're just drenched in sweat. The other suit that you see I'm in right here, this is what we call the EMU, and that's what we use for our spacewalks. And so we carry everything we need with us in the backpack. That's where our oxygen, our power, our cooling loop is coming from. So we actually use a water cooling loop with a sublimator on it, and we can control how warm or cold the suit is. And it's actually pretty amazing because as you transition from sunlight into darkness, the temperature changes pretty significantly. And so you're constantly kind of adjusting. There's what we have, I'll walk up here real quick, but that piece, that's called the DCN. That's what we use to control the spacesuit. And there's actually, you can't see it, it's a little bit lower, but there's just a dial there that we adjust up and down for controlling the temperature. But it can get very hot in there.
What advice would you give to students and people who want to become astronauts?
Do what you love. find something that you absolutely love, do it with passion, do it to the best of your ability, and then just keep applying. Don't ever give up. Again, it was my 4th time applying. I started applying back in 1996, didn't get selected till 2009. Rick Mastracchio, that you saw, one of my crewmates as well, I think he probably applied 4 or 5 times. So don't ever give up. But certainly, I went through the military side of things, and so a master's was a high enough degree because I had some experience in an operational sense. I was doing flight tests, so that kind of gives you a little bit of credit, if you will. Most of our civilian astronauts are going to have a PhD, and but again, I think the most important thing is, and we have astronauts in all fields. We have doctors, we have engineers, we have scientists, we have geologists, we have teachers, we have a lot of military, but every one of them, if they had never gotten on as an astronaut, were very happy with what they were doing and loved what they were doing. And so I think that's probably the most important thing for you. I think we got some in the back.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you've seen the movie Gravity, and if so, and if so, could you comment on how realistic it is?
How realistic is it? Well, it's not very realistic. Parts of it they capture pretty well. Some of the floating scenes and all of that, I thought were pretty accurate in terms of how you can move around the station. And some of their scenes actually inside the station itself looked very familiar. But on the other hand, the scenario wasn't very realistic, but it was a movie, and it was an entertaining movie. I certainly enjoyed it. In fact, I did watch it while I was up there. I don't know if my wife has still seen it yet or not, but I did.
Answered
see it.
that
Again,
at the other.
It was very entertaining.
At her event, she answered that question.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
So says Twitter.
Yes.
I remember when you were fixing the pump, there were a lot of precautions they had to take because there was some leakage in the spacesuit. And can you talk about that a bit?
Sure, yeah. So in July, I launched in September of 2013. In July, before I got there, 2 astronauts were out on a spacewalk, and they had a problem with this suit. Basically, I talked about that cooling loop that we had, and there's a fan pump separator inside of it, and it had gotten clogged, and it actually was allowing water to get into that ventilation loop. And so his helmet started filling up with water. So very dangerous situation, critical situation. They had only been out for, I don't even know if they'd been out an hour yet when the water started building up at the back of his head. And water behaves very differently in microgravity. It's very difficult to get it off you. It wants to stick to you. It stays in a big ball and all of that kind of stuff. And so they got him back inside safe. But then at that point, of course, all EVAs are shut down until they know what happened, because we certainly don't want to send anybody out into that environment again with the chance of drowning, which sounds kind of strange for being in space. So it took a while. I talked about that fan pump separator. It's a piece of the suit that's really not intended to be changed out in orbit, but we were able to do that, so they sent up a spare one. We changed it out. And to this day, though, they're not cleared still for normal planned EVAs for spacewalks because they're still working through some of these issues with the suit. However, the fault that happened, this pump module failure, was critical enough that they were willing, it's that risk trade that you have to do. And so we did a few things with the suit to make sure that we were as safe as we could be when we went out. Believe it or not, we actually had what we called a snorkel. It was just a tube that we had on the inside of the suit that went from right below the neck ring down to about the waist. And what that would allow you to do, if the water had built up around your head, you could just bend down and breathe. Because of course the water's not necessarily going down, right? It's not falling down from gravity or anything. So then you could breathe through that tube was one of the things. And then, believe it or not, the other thing that we had was a absorbent pad, a diaper, that we put on the back of our helmet. And so the intent of that, of course, was to absorb some of that water and keep it from pooling around your face and things of that nature. So we had some mitigation procedures in place that allowed us to, that NASA felt was worth the risk then for us to go ahead and go out and fix the pump. And so that was actually, I have to say, that was kind of an interesting moment because that suit that had the failure, and we replaced the pump. I was one of the, myself and Karen Nyberg, we replaced that fan pump separator. And then that's the suit I actually wore out the door. And I tell you, it makes you think twice when you're heading out the door in a suit that you fixed, because you've got no one to blame but yourself if something goes wrong with it. But fortunately, everything went okay, and we were able to fix the station. Yes?
What's the difference adapting to a microgravity environment versus readapting to gravity coming back onto Earth?
You know, that's a great question. And in reality, for me, they were kind of similar, right? It's almost, and I think probably if anybody's Navy or anything like that, you know, you talk about getting your sea legs and you talk about getting your land legs back, and in reality, that's kind of what happens. So going uphill, I talked about the feeling of falling. I talked about the feeling that I was flying left wing down. That kind of went away after 24 hours, but you still don't feel just quite normal. We have a desire for there to be an up and a down, right? And you really want that, but when you're in the space station, it doesn't matter. And so at some point, your mind just kind of accepts that, and it's pretty neat because you'll be working on an experiment or you'll be changing out a piece of hardware, and you'll get yourself in a position to do the job. And then you'll kind of look around and you realize, my gosh, I'm standing on the ceiling. And you know, your mind just forgets about an up or down. And so that's pretty cool when you get to that point. And I would say that probably starts to happen around, for me anyway, the 2-week point. Now coming back down to ground, I talked about those vestibular issues. The Earth was moving quite a bit when I landed, believe it or not. I don't know if you guys felt it as well as I did, but there was a lot of wobbliness in the Earth. It's kind of funny too. One of the things, you know, I talked about the pitching moment, the vestibular issues, and it's pretty interesting. You can see it now, having flown in space. When you watch a guy that's just returned from microgravity, you can see in how they walk. You don't do a lot of side-to-side stuff, and I'll kind of demonstrate it. You kind of get yourself going, and then you just go. And so you'll see them, and it's just kind of, they're almost just falling, and they're just going straight ahead. There's no side-to-side movement. So that takes a little while to get used to. It's interesting enough, you know, I talked about all the exercise we do up there. So we do fitness tests before launch, and we do it right after we get back as well. And all of that exercise, and I worked out a lot. Again, 2 hours a day, probably 4 hours a day on the weekend. I did a little bit extra on the weekends just because I like to work out. But despite doing all of that, which is much more than I normally work out here on Earth, I was able just to maintain my fitness level. I was able to have the same strength. I was able to have the same VO2 max. But one other interesting point I'll say about that, so 2 days before landing, I ran 12 miles on the treadmill. And I was loaded up probably at around 165, 170 pounds with that harness system. 10 days after landing, they finally let me go outside and run, and running 3 miles was a struggle. So, you know, there's something that happens to you, even though my strength numbers, even though my VO2 max numbers were coming out the same, you know, something's happening that it's very hard to do those extended workouts like what I was doing on orbit. So it takes a little bit. I feel pretty good now, 2 months later, and unfortunately I've already forgotten what it's like to float, and that's really sad. Yes?
I was just wondering if you could touch some more on managing liquid in space. We saw you eat, but
yeah.
About drinking and hygiene.
Yeah, drinking and hygiene. So I guess you probably know where this one's going. So with the WHC there, that we have to fix a lot. So we recycle, and so a lot of our drinking water is our urine. Just doesn't taste like urine by the time it gets to us. So that's a pretty critical system for us, not only on the space station, because as you all are well aware, you know, water's heavy and we don't want to have to resupply that. But again, if we're ever going to go onto Mars or anywhere outside of low Earth orbit, we've got to have a system like that. And so from a drinking standpoint, you know, the water is really good up there. It tastes just fine. We use little drinking bags that we put it into. The food up there, we have quite a bit of food, quite a variety of food. It's if anybody's in the military, the MREs, it's kind of similar to that. But we also have dehydrated food. We have a lot of food that's what you can buy in the store, granola bars, things like that. And then we get tortillas every once in a while. That's pretty special. One other thing I'll just mention about the fluids, of course, they do behave quite differently, and there are several experiments that are going on up there. One of them is the capillary flow experiment, where we're looking at how fluids behave in different shaped vessels and how that shape and the capillary flow can be used to separate liquids and gases. And so there's been quite a bit of experiments going on with that, and it's kind of neat. That's one of those that is being used in ways they never thought. There's out of Northwestern University, there's a professor up there, I think, that's working on trying to come up with a detector for infectious diseases like HIV and things of that nature. And he was having problems because it involves several fluids and how to move those fluids around on this little card, because he wants to be able, it needs to be cheap and it has to have low power, things like that, so they can use it in poor countries where there's not a lot of access and things like that. And they were having issues with it, and believe it or not, he talked to this principal investigator from this capillary flow experiment, and they were able to share what they had learned on how fluids behave in microgravity, how the capillary flow works for them, that they were able to apply on this device here at home for detecting infectious diseases. So it's kind of neat how what we're doing up there, we may be doing a lot of it for future space flight, for future exploration beyond low Earth orbit, and yet you can find uses for it right here on Earth. Yes? See a little person back there.
How comfy is it in the spacesuit?
How comfortable is it in the spacesuit? Yeah, that's a good question. The spacesuits themselves, they're not the most comfortable in the world, thing in the world. And part of the problem is, we're all different. You look around and we all are shaped a little bit differently. We all have different sizes and everything. And so the suits, you can only make them so many sizes. And so it never fits just right. And like the suit that you saw that we launch up and down with, I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of times you'll see us kind of walking around kind of hunched over. Well, that's because when we're in the suit in the Soyuz spacecraft, we're actually sitting down on our backs, and that's a more natural position for the suit at that point. And so it fits you a little better when you're leaning on your back, but when you're walking around, it's not as uncomfortable. This particular suit as well, it's got a hard upper torso. We call it a hut. And then it's got bearings here at your shoulders. It's got bearings here down at your elbows as well. And again, those bearings never quite fit your shoulder exactly where it needs to be. And so sometimes you can, you can get pretty sore around the shoulders. That hut, that cooling system that I talked about with the hut as well. There's unfortunately the water valves or the pipes, they come in right at your back, and so it's always kind of digging into your back. But at the same time, you're out in space, so it's pretty easy to deal with. Yes?
You said you did some experiments, or you participated in some experiments on your vision.
Yeah.
Do you know what they were looking for?
Yeah, so yes. So what's happened with the long duration space flight is some astronauts are coming down with impacts to their vision. So their pressure in your head is changing when you're up there, and that's having impacts on the eyes. And so actually with some of us, you can see the back of the eyes is actually getting flattened out some, which is changing that vision. And normally what happens when you land within a few months or so, that kind of goes away, you go back to normal. But we're seeing cases where that's not happening. And again, so now as we start to look at sending someone to Mars, it would be a really bad day to get to Mars and not be able to see well enough to be able to explore. And so it's a pretty critical issue for us right now. And so it's amazing the amount of different imaging that we're doing. We use tonometry to look at the pressure on our eyes. We're using a fundoscope, an OCT. You saw a picture with an ultrasound. We do use the ultrasound quite a bit while we're up there, which is pretty amazing as well. And that's another one of those areas where there is a lot of benefit to what we're doing because we use remote guiders. Because like I said, I'm an engineer. I don't know the ultrasound itself, and when you're looking at that screen and they're saying, oh, that's the vein we want, and you're going, I have no idea what you're looking at. But you have these remote guiders that are seeing what you're imaging, and they are amazing. I mean, they'll sit there and they'll tell you, okay, I need you just to rotate your wrist about 5 degrees in, and then all of a sudden what they're looking for will show up and we'll record those images. And those are the same kind of techniques now that these machines that very small that can go out to remote villages and places like that, and now all of a sudden you have through remote guidance the techniques that allow people from a medical standpoint to be able to analyze injuries or things of that nature that may normally not have access to those kind of capabilities. Yes, where are we looking? Right here? Okay.
I just wanted to say that that's a really epic selfie, and it's got to have a lot of likes on Facebook, first of all. But my question was actually about your relationship with the Russians on board. You mentioned that you were pretty good friends with him, he's a good guy. But how did like Russian and U.S. politics like play into that? Because around that time frame, I think the Crimea thing was going on, and actually most recently I heard that they have put sanctions on us and denied rides for our astronauts in 2020 based on that. Could you comment on that?
Sure. Well, the first thing I'll say that, there's the politics and then there's the current agreements between NASA and Roscosmos, which we're currently operating under. And at this point in time, as far as I'm aware, those agreements are well and strong and continuing to be honored by both parties. And at the working level, the Russians that we work with, the cosmonauts, the trainers, the folks in their MCC or in their control rooms, they're great people. And when you really get down to it, that's what you find out on these international stages like this, where you're really depending on each other. And so from that level, I think we're in pretty good shape. In terms of going beyond 2020, that's the current agreements for the space station is 2020 for its lifetime. And so I think there's still work to be done to get all of the international partners on board to continue in the space station beyond that. And so, that's certainly beyond what I'm involved in at this point. A lot of that's the types of things that are being done out in Washington, D.C., and fortunately I'm not there at this point. Yes?
There was a moment when you were switching out an audio box or an audio component, and I was wondering, do you just have shipments of all of the different components that come up, and do you have replacements for everything on board, or are there?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Also, do you, just related to an earlier question, what was your favorite or least favorite experiment to work on? So.
Oh wow, that's tough. So in terms of spare parts, that's a very tough question to answer because you only have limited up mass, and so you got to decide what's important to have up there and what's not. So we don't have replacement parts for everything. A lot of that depends on what the tested lifetime is of these parts. And so you saw that audio bus coupler that I changed out. That was probably the only spare we had on board, which means now guys on the ground are sitting there saying, okay, when can we get a new one on the manifest to get up there again? And so the people on the ground are constantly juggling that of what are the critical things that we've got to make sure we have spare parts on. The pump module that we changed out on the external system, that was one of 2 replacement parts, and unfortunately on those types of items we don't have a lot of options for those big items since the shuttle is now retired. So what they did do before the shuttle was retired is they tried to think out how long are we going to keep the space station going, 2020, 2024. So what's that mean? What are the odds of losing pump modules? So how many do we need to have up there? And so they've really gone through and tried to predict what that's going to be. So hopefully anything that does go wrong with it, we've got the right parts on board. As of right now, that's been the case. But occasionally not, and occasionally though, if it's small enough, then it'll take priority and it might bump off our apples, and we have to. And in fact, that fan pump separator that I talked about for the suit, that knocked out some of the room for the fresh fruit when it came up, but that's okay. That was pretty important. But anyway, the other question you asked about was the experiments, the most favorite, the least favorite. I wouldn't say there's any that were not favorite. I'm not gonna get set up that way. No, I really enjoy, again, the experiments that we got to work directly with the principal investigators on the ground. So you'd be in contact with them, like the spheres, the capillary flow experiment was a guy out of Portland. Man, I mean, you work with those guys, and they are so enthusiastic about what they're doing, and it just bleeds over, and you get excited about it, and you have them looking over your shoulder as you're going through the experiments, and they're seeing something new, and they're, wow, that's cool, and you're going, wow, that is cool, what is it? And they're trying to explain to you at the same time. So the ones where we're directly working, though, with the principal investigators, I'd say is probably my favorite. Yes.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for sharing your experience. It was great. I was wondering, another medically related question, if you could tell us to what extent and then how your vital signs are monitored at different parts of the trip?
Yeah. So when we launch, you do have some electrodes that are hooked up to you that are monitoring your vital signs. And then when we go out on the spacewalks as well, they are monitoring that. They're monitoring things like your heart rates. They're monitoring, really one of the big things that they're monitoring is your consumables. So your power and your oxygen. And in fact, there was on my first spacewalk, initially when we went out the door, there was a time when they asked me from the ground, they said, okay, we need you just to hang out for a few minutes to get your metabolic rate down a little bit. Because otherwise, we potentially would have to cut the mission or the spacewalk short a little bit. So they plan on 6.5 hours. The first one we were out there for 5.5 hours. The second one we were out there for 7.5. And so, again, they're managing that the whole time, really worried about it in terms of making sure we have enough to get the job done. Yeah. Where are we? Okay.
Yeah. So my question is, whatever subjects that you took, whatever research that you did when you were in your grad school at Stanford, were they somehow related to your experiments at the space station, or were they actually very helpful in you getting selected into the astronaut program?
You're saying, like, my time here at Illinois, was there any classes that I took specifically that related? Not really. Of course, a lot of times your education, at least for me, is you're gaining a lot of general knowledge. And it's hard to say what was specific that you needed and what you didn't. You're soaking up all of that knowledge and information, and you're applying it in probably ways that you never realize. And so I can't say that there was anything specific, a class specific that I took that I absolutely had to have. But on the other hand, I needed them all to be able to do this. And what we do, once you get into an assigned mission flow and they start to look at what experiments you're going to do, you will start to have lessons specific to those experiments, but really, more often than not, it ends up being how to execute them, not necessarily all of the physics behind it. We just don't have enough time to become experts on all of that stuff because, again, we have to know how to be able to do everything up there, from running the experiments to fixing the toilets to going out on spacewalks to using the robotic arm to capture a vehicle. And so that's where it's a team effort, and we have to rely on the experts here on the ground for a lot of that kind of detailed knowledge, I think, that you're kind of alluding to. And so it really lends itself to a team effort. Yeah. Do we have any more? Yes.
So when you were a student here, how did you manage being on the football team, majoring in aerospace engineering, and being in Air Force ROTC?
I had a lot of help, I'll say, and you really don't want to see my first physics test. That didn't go so well. To be honest, actually, it was a bit of an advantage, I think. I spent a lot of time at the football field, but I obviously spent a lot of time in the classroom as well, and with ROTC. But one of the advantages of being on the football team, I got priorities on classes, so I got to do just the morning classes so that I'd have my afternoons free so I could go to practice. But the other thing was they have tutors available, and I utilized those. Again, after that first physics test was pretty tough for me, and so I actually used a tutor for, at that time I think we had three classes of physics that we had to go through, and I relied very heavily on help. And so for me as well, doing those many different types of activities, helped because there wasn't a lot of free time, right? So, you know, I knew that I had to get up, be at class at 8, and by 1 o'clock I needed to be over at the stadium. You know, by the time we'd leave there, it'd be 7 o'clock at night, and, you know, that's when I then had to go do my orbital mechanics homework. And, and then, you know, by the time you get done with that, it's 11 o'clock at night, midnight, time to go to bed and start it all over again the next day. And, you know, so it was a pretty rigid schedule, believe it or not. And I think that was helpful for me. It didn't provide a lot of free time to you know, to maybe do things that wasn't as useful for my time. Yes?
So I was watching on there, and a lot of the clips you had really great short hair all the time. So how do you keep your hair nice and short in space without it going all over and getting into everything?
So that's an interesting question, because there are a lot of those little things. And in fact, we talk about it oftentimes. You know, space, living in the microgravity environment makes the impossible possible. Like being able to one person handle an 800-pound pump module, right? I mean, microgravity makes that possible. But then a lot of the simple things become difficult up there. And simple things like eating, like drinking, like going to the bathroom, haircuts become a little more harder. And one of the problems with that is none of us are skilled at haircuts. And so we actually, you know, we just have clippers up there, and I'll have to tell a funny story. So Koichi Wakata, one of my crewmates, he's cutting my hair the first time, and if any of you use the clippers, you know they got the numbers, right? So, you know, 0 is down to the skin, 1, 2, 3, gets a little longer. And so, you know, I'd always tell him, okay, I want 1 on the side, then go 2 a little higher, 3, and then 4 across the top. And so that means I'm going to have a little bit longer across the top that you see right now. And so he starts out with 1 on the side, then he goes 2, then he goes 3, then he goes 2. So then I had this little gap down the middle. So I was forced to go to a 2, then all across the rest of my head at that point. So that's probably why you saw some of the short hair that you did. Yes.
Question. Thank you so much for sharing all your stories. So you have a lot of, I guess I have 2 questions. You have a lot of people from different countries up there. What time is space time?
We're on Greenwich Mean Time, so Zulu time. And so right now they're, I guess, probably 6 hours ahead of us. So they're probably 10 o'clock. So Steve Swanson and Oleg and Sasha are probably getting ready to go to bed at this point in time. So that, you know, it's interesting to say that, though, because that makes it very difficult for the ground teams because it's never really the right time for any of them. And so when our day starts, the ground team in Houston, it's typically 1 in the morning. And so that's what we call Orbit 1 for them. And so they're working the night shift. And then Orbit 2, you know, they kind of have a little bit more normal time. But then Orbit 3 is when we're sleeping. So yeah, that's what we use. And of course, you know, we go around the Earth 16 times a day, so 16 sunrises, sunsets. But really, we just, you know, turning on and off the lights how we know what time of the day it is for us.
And I guess my other question, you were going to tell us a story, and then it didn't pause. Can you share that story?
I was going to tell you.
About your family.
I think I may have gotten that in, and that was really as you know, that was one of those moments that really stick out in your head. As when I was on that robotic arm, and you're swinging below the space station, and so you know you literally are just hanging there at the edge of the world, and then you know carrying that pump module, and it was that moment as it's swinging up, and then it stops, and you kind of float up, and you feel like you're floating away with the pump module. That was the story I was gonna pause and describe there, but I think I got that in. Yes.
Whatever the spaceship is made out of, how does it not dissolve in the atmosphere?
Oh yeah, well again, a lot of smart people around here figured out the right materials to use on those spaceships so that as it does come in, we have what we call a heat shield on the bottom of that spaceship, and so really it's absorbing all of that energy, and there's parts of it that actually burn off, as you could see. There was part of that video where you saw some of those sparks and things that were going by. That's part of the heat shield, the protective system that's you know taking all of that energy and not putting it inside the capsule where we are. Yes.
with more experience being gained, we are learning about more and more health hazards that are associated with the space travel. So as of today, is there any prescribed time limit up to which a person could safely be allowed to be in space?
So is there not...
considering the various health hazards,
how long can we go?
How the longest allowable time duration for a space travel?
Yeah, so you know, we don't really know the answer to that yet. And in fact, we're getting ready to, next year, one of our astronauts and one of the cosmonauts is going to go up for a full year. The Russians have had cosmonauts that have been on station. I think the longest was almost 400 days or more than 400 days or something like that. So, you know, that's part of the knowledge that we're trying to gain by sending people up there for a year, because it's really quite interesting. You know, I mentioned the fact that when I landed, you know, strength-wise and everything, I was in pretty good, I felt like I was in pretty good shape, but just being able to go out and run was difficult. And, you know, you think about that here on Earth, but now let's think about, we finally get to Mars, and they want you to go outside and explore Mars, right? But what can you really do when you get there? Because if I felt like I did, you know, 10 days later here on Earth, if I felt that way on Mars, I think it'd be pretty tough to go outside and do a, you know, 6-8 hour EVA, if you will, out there and exploring Mars. So we've got a lot to learn on that, and part of the way we're going to do that is we're going to start sending astronauts to the space station for longer periods of time. Yes?
I was wondering, I think it would be really important
Yeah, that's a great question. So you get a lot of that up there. There is a lot of dust. You know, your skin, you know, a lot of it flakes off, and you know, like the soles of your feet, you got all those kind of hard calluses on your heels and stuff. Well, after you've been in space for a few months, all of that, you know, it starts to flake away. And hairs, for me, you know, not quite as bad. Karen Nyberg, if you saw her floating around. You know, she's got that long blonde hair, and 6 months after she left, we're still finding long blonde hairs. But you know, you have the filtration system. So as the air's circulating around, we have filters that are collecting a lot of that. And every Saturday is cleaning day on station. And so you get out the vacuums, you clean up, you vacuum up the, and it's great. You know, you keep it pretty clean. It is very clean up there. But you have to work at it. And don't tell my wife I vacuum. Yes?
First off, thank you very much for your service. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
My 9-year-old son and my 11-year-old daughter aren't here, but they sent me questions. My son wants to know if it smelled up there, and my daughter wants to know if any animals came on the trip.
Yeah, okay. So does it smell? I didn't think so, but I think if... You know, my guess is that there was probably a particular odor up there, but of course when you live in it, you start to grow numb to it and probably don't notice it as much. You know, one of the things that when we got ready to do those spacewalks, and those were emergency spacewalks, and so the suit wasn't really cleared yet, and we didn't know exactly what was causing things to clog up, and so they were afraid that some of the soap products that we use up there to keep clean was contributing to it. And so for 2 weeks there before the spacewalks, we weren't allowed to use the soap products to keep clean. So I know at that point it did smell on board. I will also say, you know, and this is interesting enough, and I'd actually love to talk to some of the professors here about it, because they're probably going to know a little more about it, but believe it or not, space has a smell. You know, when you saw the visiting vehicle dock, and so on the vehicle itself, there's a hatch. On the space station, there's a hatch. And then there's a little space in between, the vestibule. And so you have to pressurize that vestibule. And so you are pumping air into it. But when you opened up that hatch, there was a smell. And there was a distinct, and you know, you're like, wow, what is that? And you talk to your crewmates that have been up there before, and they're like, oh, that's the smell of space. And it's pretty weird. I mean, it was very distinct. It's kind of like, I don't know, an ionization type smell or something like that. So it was very unique. So that was kind of interesting. And then the other animals. Do we have animals up there? Well, you saw the ants. The ants came up, and they lived for a couple of weeks. And that was, the experiment itself was actually quite interesting. There wasn't any queens or anything, so the ants are just going to naturally die off. And so that was an interesting experiment. In the future, there have been in the past, mice have gone up, and fish have gone up, spiders. So there's been a wide variety of animals that have been on station. I think the ants, we had some fish actually up there as well that were part of a Japanese experiment. So yeah, there are some animals up there.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi, it's an amazing talk. I just wanted to ask, do you get multiple opportunities to go into space?
I'm sorry?
So do you get multiple opportunities to go into space, or there's once in a lifetime?
Do I get
multiple opportunities to go into space?
Multiple opportunities. I sure hope so. Yeah. There's about I don't know, 40 to 50 active U.S. astronauts, and so I know where I stand in the line now, having just returned, and that's at the back. But that's okay. It's an incredible opportunity. I feel very blessed, very fortunate to have had the opportunity. I'm certainly going to put my name in again, but I also realistically know that this may have been the only chance I get, or that if I do get another chance to fly into space, it may be 5, 6, 7 years before that happens. But there's plenty of things for us to do on the ground. We support the astronauts that are on station. We support the astronauts that are training, and then we also have astronauts involved in the new programs that are looking at being able to launch U.S. astronauts from U.S. soil again, and so we're involved in those. So there's plenty of work to do that doesn't involve flying in space, but that's certainly the one we all are hoping to get to do. Yes?
Is running or performing the experiments considered your primary job when you're up there?
Yeah.
And then what percentage of time during the day?
No, that's a good question, and that's a hard one to answer. We do tend to track utilization hours as astronauts for when we're performing experiments or when we're doing things like I mentioned, changing out the hardware so that people on the ground could execute. That's what we call utilization hours. Believe it or not, it's quite hard. So you've got 3 astronauts that are down in the USOS segment, and the planned time is 35, 40 hours a week. So you've got 3 astronauts on board. You think about a 40-hour work week. You're only getting a third of the time being applied towards experiments utilization. And the rest of the time is doing things like the maintenance and exercise and all of those other things that you have to do to keep the space station running. Now we're continuing to improve that. We have weeks where we'll have a lot more utilization hours, 70 hours, 80 hours, and those are really good weeks when those are happening. But again, I say it's hard to use just the astronauts' hours because there are experiments out there like that alpha magnetic spectrometer that I talked about that are running all the time. Right? And so that is science that's happening, even though an astronaut isn't necessarily hands-on doing something with it. And so I think we have to keep that in perspective when we think about how much science is being done on board the station. Let's see. Do we have any more?
All right. I think we're gonna have to stop.
Oh, that's too bad.
Well, you'll have more chance to listen to Mike tomorrow morning at the football stadium. Together with thousands of other people. I would like to really thank you very much for doing this. So please join me in thanking.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good.
I would like to use this opportunity to recognize Professor John Pressing, who was Mike's advisor when he was here on campus.
I'm actually going to go say hello. Thank you very much.
It's good to see you. So thank you all for coming. I hope you learn as much as I did. I really enjoyed this talk, so thank you again, and have a good evening. Have a good weekend.